Welcome back to the core, human relations in world missions, and we are continuing on. The last time we were together, we were entering into the section concerning the missionary and world cultures. And we also learned that culture is the ocean in which we missionaries swim. And we need to learn how to adapt. We need to learn how to recreate ourselves. In other words, I left you with a challenge and a question: are you able to reinvent yourself? If you were an old dog, can you learn new tricks? Which, by the way, I know the expression, an old dog can't learn new tricks, can't teach an old dog new tricks, but we're not dogs, amen? We are people, and we are flexible, at least we should learn to be. Let's let God make us whatever He wants to be. Submit yourself to God as you offer yourself in service to Him, a living sacrifice on His altar, and let Him make into you whatever He wants you to become, especially as a missionary as we go. And it's our responsibility to learn that. I want us to go back to the book now as we continue in this subject, where we see relationships with others in the realms of traditions. In each region in which you work, there are complex rules of engagement with people within that society. So we have to discover how to relate to others. One is between the sexes, for instance, men with men and women with men and men with women and women with women, and how we relate to it. In many cultures, a man, for instance, cannot even speak to a woman. Now, I know we live in an age of enlightenment, and women are equals in many realms, and I don't have a problem with that at all. You've already heard me share about the women in ministry and their capacity and what I see in the Bible, even female apostles doing the work of God, and we know what the Bible says. However, in cultures, we know around the world that perspective of women is not shared, and women are not always afforded the same place of honor and respect. I believe the curse is eradicated, and therefore all people are equal, that He's no respecter of persons. Men and women are the same. So therefore, women have all the same rights and privileges that we have, and therefore they can operate in them. But we're going into other cultures now, and we're going to have to learn that there are some cultures that are very extreme where you cannot talk to women. Some villages, you would never have a conversation with a female. You only speak to males, and females speak to females, and a female will never even address you, and you certainly should never address the female. In fact, if you are speaking to a female in certain cultures in the world, you will be seen as an enemy and maybe even be under arrest or persecuted, in the sense of prosecuted, because you're breaking their rules and their laws. And you think, well, why would they be that way? Why would they not allow men to speak to women and women speak to men? Well, think about how many things can be eliminated if we did not speak to people of the opposite sex. It'd be very hard to enter into a relationship in fornication or even adultery if you were not allowed to speak to females at all. And I like what Paul says: it's better for a man not to touch a woman. And I agree with Paul. It's better that you not associate or connect to women if you do not have control. Well, some cultures, they just don't trust the people to control themselves, and so therefore they see it as aberrant behavior when you walk up to a female as a male and talk, or vice versa. And it'll always be seen as flirtatious. In certain places of the world, even the simplest ways that you communicate, maybe just a smile, you understand. So if you smile at certain people, they may take it in the wrong way, especially a male when a female smiles at that male. Now, in a Western culture, or in a culture where that's accepted, of course you can talk to women anywhere and women can talk to men. But then let's go forward into some areas of the world, regions of India, regions of Africa, regions of Indonesia, regions of Malaysia, even in certain tribal zones around the world, and sometimes even in whole places such as the Islamic republics, and where Mohammedan rule is in place, Sharia law, etc. Females do not talk to males, males do not talk to females, except for exactly needful things like bus fare. How much does it cost? And the man can tell a woman how much it costs to get on the bus. Interacting in markets, you can barter amounts of money. But amicable speaking, friendship, between the sexes is not allowed in a lot of regions. So if you're used to just freely speaking to people of the opposite sex at any given time, this is going to be a real challenge for you. And I have seen this happen. I've learned to not be friendly. As a woman, I've learned that it's not good for a woman to be friendly to men in places such as India. Being careful about that. Unless there's a disparity of age that is sufficient that it's almost like a mother to a son, or if a father to a daughter, not so much, because that could even be seen as perverse. But there are exceptions, but by and large, no, you don't. And I've had missionaries on the field that I've trained and taught, and have even said in this class that I'm teaching you right now extensively for many hours, and I told them about this pattern in India, trained them as missionaries in India. Don't smile at men. Don't be friendly with men. Be curt, be cordial, but don't show any smiling or happiness. And there are a couple occasions I could mention where I had one particular female missionary that she had a real hard time with this concept, because she thought that, as Christians, we need to be kind and we need to show the love of God. And so she didn't really take wholeheartedly. She was like me with the bucket, not wanting to sweep with water. She thought, Stephen seems a little bitter, and he really can't, it's always good to be friendly. So we were in a marketplace where we were shopping in different stalls in a densely populated market area, and sometimes you enter into these little kiosks or these market things, there's only room for one or two people in there. Some of the most densely populated market, for instance, if you've never been in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, there's a market there called the Russian market. The reason it's called the Russian market is it was once a place of arms dealership by Russian military, but now it is a small block space. It is the most densely packed market I've ever been to, with the exception of maybe Crawford Market in Kolaba in India, in Mumbai. But this market called the Russian market, so densely populated. If you go into, for instance, into a little stall to interact, nobody else can. So it's like that in India. We were in a market like that, and the missionary girl stayed out in the corridor between the kiosks while I went in to do something. Well, in my absence there, for minutes, just a few feet away from each other, a man came up and approached her, whereby she looked and disregarded what I said. She should have looked at the man and said, "No, thank you, no, thank you," and looked down. But instead, she said, "No, no, thank you," and she smiled, whereby this man became very excited. And because from his perspective, within this culture, because of his cultural myopia, you could say, tunnel vision about the way he saw things, because she was smiling at him, she was coming on to him. And so he got excited. And he talked to her more. "You sure?" And she was like, no, thank you. Shy and just being sweet, right? Sweet. Yeah, she was sweet, all right. To him, sweet as candy. And he got so excited, he began to fondle himself. Meaning that he reached down and touched his nether regions in anticipation of activity, whereby she was appalled and began to pull away. And she smiled again, "Okay," and he reached out to shake her hand, and she foolishly, in fear, reached out and shook his hand. When he took her hand, he picked it up and kissed her hand, which she still was like, okay, but then he licked her hand. Now, at this point, she shrieks in fear. I jump out of the stall. "What's going on out here?" That man is looking around in fear. The Muslims we were shopping in a Muslim shop. He comes out, looks at this man. Another store owner comes out, looks at that man. And before you know it, those men believe that he was molesting or going after this young missionary girl, whereby they address him and start yelling at him in Marathi, in the language this was in Mumbai, and then he resists and insists that no, she this, she that, and to make a long story short, they drug him out in the back somewhere and gave him a beating. Bloodied him. gave him a beating. And the missionary girl, of course, was distraught and fearful. And at this moment, I turned to her and I said, "What happened?" And she said, I was just being friendly. And I said, "What did I tell you?" And she said, "Well, you told us and she said, "You told us not to smile, not to do this." Not. I said, "So why didn't you do it?" She said, "Well, I was just trying to be friendly." I said, "Well, look what you've caused. Look and learn. This is your fault. That man is bleeding right now because of you. Because you're the foreign element. You're the foreigner that's come in here and you've disobeyed exactly what I taught you to do. Now you think about what you've done." And as an authority, as a missionary, a veteran missionary on the field, I had to instill that value in the poor girl. Let me say this though, that girl never again smiled at people like that. She learned how to, yes, no, thank you, and look away. Because cultures are different, very, very different. And we must be careful because we can cause a lot of issues. I'll give you another instance. We were in some taxis in downtown Mumbai. It's a big city, and it looks like a lot. We had missionaries that were visiting from, a team came from the United States, and the first thing I do with them when they would come is I would sit them down and I would have an orientation whereby I would warn them about all these things, tell them don't do this. One of the things I would tell them is don't give money. Do not give, not even a coin, not even the smallest amount to anyone. Because in this culture, if you do so, it's like blowing a trumpet of invitation to every single person that will come after you. And you will be bombarded. In fact, it could become so bad that people will tear your things from you and even steal your purse and run off, etc. All that also was the rules. When you wear a purse with a strap, you wear it across. You cross. You don't put it on a shoulder hanging off on one side because it's easy for someone to grab. Put it over your neck. And make sure, and you slide your purse to your front and put your arm on top of your purse. You guard your things, you protect, especially in inner city realms like that. But specifically concerning money to people who are begging, very bad idea in a place like Mumbai. And they look for foreigners. And so, long story short, we gave them these instructions and we're getting in a taxi. I have a few of them, few missionaries in the back seat, women that are in the back, and I'm in the front next to the driver, and I'm talking to him, and we're going to our destination, and we get stuck in traffic, which is all the time in Mumbai, and there in traffic, a tribal woman who has, big nose rings on and full tribal, because they come from villages into the main city to beg. Actually, they come to look for work, and when they can't get work, they are left begging to be able to survive. And yes, your heart will go out for that. There's a way to help them, and then there's a way not to help them, and handing them money, that's only serving you to feel better about doing something, but you're really not helping anything. And so this woman disregarded what I had told her, and she slipped a 10 rupee note out of the window of the taxi, whereby the woman took it, her eyes lit up, and she did this, yelled out this tribal call. And suddenly, all these tribal women from her group that were all mixed, dispersed in the crowds there begging, figured target, because we had a taxi with a bunch of foreigners in it. So there they are, all around the taxi, knocking on the glass, the taxi driver's yelling at them, stop, go away. He's yelling, doing it, it's too late. They are, so many of them are around the taxi that they're shaking the taxi. Literally, they were rocking the taxi, banging, reaching their fingers in the glass. I said, roll up the windows, and because they're going to reach in and grab things and turn it into a mob. This one little 10 rupee note going out the window, boom, it's caused this explosion of activity. The police, of course, see this, and these policemen come over and attack the beggars with bamboo canes. And so they take these sticks and they just start, mercilessly whacking these women. They don't care. They're hitting them in the face and the back and the arms and their hands. Just imagine this brutal beating. The women are running and screaming and running away, and some are bleeding, and it's a terrible, situation, the women inside the taxi are horrified and they're shaking. They're looking at me like, we're going to die. And I turned around and the first thing I asked was, what did you do? Because I knew that something like that doesn't happen on its own. And she said, I just gave him a little money. And the other missionary group visiting looked at the woman like, you're not supposed to do that. And I said, see that? Look at those women. I said, that's your fault. Because you come in from a foreign culture thinking you understand things and you don't. Learn lessons. And this is the problem. Once you adapt to a culture like this and you become like the culture, even when people come from your host or your original culture, your birthplace, and see you act the way you do, they misinterpret it. And I never forget one time we were in Mexico and I had my vehicle and I cleaned it spotlessly and went to pick up my pastor and his wife at the airport in southern Mexico. And I was driving them over to our place. And once again, we stopped at a traffic light and a beggar came and he was going to clean my window. And this boy, a filthy boy, jumps up on the hood of my car to try to clean the glass. And I yell at him, I say, no. Well, first I'd been telling him no through the glass. No, no, with a mean face. And it was the first, my pastor's wife is the first time she's seeing this in this realm, this poor street kid. You look at him, God bless his little darling little heart. He doesn't have anything. He's filthy. He's starving. And I happen to know the kid. He's a glue sniffer. He hung out on that block for the last year of my life. I saw him, and he had more money than I had because he gained so much. So I knew the truth behind him, and I knew the ministries that were already reaching out to him, and I knew the street evangelists that had a center for them, and they would come in and dump their monies on tables, and it sometimes would be $100 to $200 in a day, whereby the slumlords that controlled them would take that money and just give those kids glue and kept them high on glue, etc. The problem is much deeper than you think, but disregarding my instructions and what I'm trying to say to them, this kid, I'm saying, no. And he jumps up. And when he jumps up, he's got filth, and literally he's scratching the hood of my car, which I just waxed and polished so it could be nice for my pastor's wife. But I yelled at him. Finally, I rolled down the window. I said, you get down. I yelled at him, screamed at him, and the kid ran off because it's the only language he'll understand. Now, what you don't know is I had given to that child before. I have fed that child. I've spoken to that child. I spent time with that child in the appropriate way to best reach him with the gospel. She didn't know that. So from her cultural perspective, I have embittered myself out here on the mission field, and I'm this dark soul that hates people and am angry. And it's just a cultural perception again, not understanding. And believe me, these people in cultures around the world, especially in the begging realm, they look for weakness. And if they see it at all, they will go after it. They're like a lion hunting, a lioness in the plain, looking for the limping gazelle. And if they spot any weakness, they're going to come after you. So make sure that you learn these things. Very important lessons. So important. And now we're going back to between the sexes. I've gotten kind of off theme here because these stories, all these thousands of experiences I've had through the years come to mind. And we're talking about the fact that in many cultures a man cannot even speak to a woman. Well, how do you minister to the women? How do you relate to them? Well, you don't. Mostly you don't. Your wife does. Sisters, if you're a female, then you can minister to them. So you can get yourself killed in some areas for breaking these rules. They'll lynch you and they'll hang you as a man if you're doing this. As a woman, not so much, but they will punish you if you're a woman talking to men in some of these areas. So we learn these lessons. Now, if you're in another area, it's because some areas the relationship between the sexes is free and there are no rules of separation. Now, let's let this pendulum swing in the opposite direction, because this can be dangerous for someone who has not had to interact with people of the opposite sex often. Maybe you come from a culture where it's a little more reserved. Maybe you've come from a Christian culture in the United States, and a young man does not interact much with women. He only deals with the church culture. What if he's a homeschooled boy, which, by the way, I'm talking about a very specific case of a youth group that came down to visit us once in one of our places in Mexico. And a whole group of like 12 of these youth came down. Wonderful trip. But this one young man who was blondish in his hair color, and in his home culture in the United States, he was not considered attractive. You understand? No girls were flirting with this guy because he was not considered attractive, really. And so now he comes down to this impoverished area in Mexico, and the young girls around his age that were Mexican girls in this particular culture, which was notoriously sensual. This is southern Mexico, Acapulco, where the women were a lot more open, sensual, and all looking for a male. In fact, most village girls or poor girls were trying to hook a husband of some kind. What better husband than a foreigner who they think is rich coming to their culture? And so therefore, all of them pay attention to this young man, smiling and hi, practicing their English. How are you today? And the cute little flirty faces. And he was overwhelmed. Suddenly, he's exalted to the realm of model. And he's a Backstreet Boy, or, he's a Korean boy band singer. He is like considered so beautiful. Wow. And it goes to his head. It overwhelms him. And so he wants to talk to every little girl. See, that's kind of an opposite view of how this can happen. Lucky for him, some people might say, but no, it still creates a severe problem, especially in my ministry. Because then later on, he goes off and gets involved with this young woman. And in fact, in that particular missions team that came down at that time, one of the young men had a sexual relationship with a young woman. And that's an issue. How do we deal with things like that? You want to be a missionary, I'm telling you, you're going to have to confront some things that you would have never expected to happen. All because of cultural issues. And these cultures are extremely different. And it can be dangerous, especially between the sexes. We go to the next category under this heading of relationships with others between different ages. In many nations, even the form of language you speak varies when you interact with an elder. In other words, when you meet someone, and maybe in your culture, depending where you're from, when you meet someone who's older, you have a certain degree of respect, honorific behavior. Within languages even, we'll get to this later in languages itself, but there are honorific forms of language. You do not speak to an elder with even the same form of language that you speak. And I'll give you an example to try to have you understand this in English. In English, if I met you and you're about my age, like, hey, what's up? How you doing? What's up? Where you from? What's going on? That's very colloquial, company, you, this. But if I meet someone much older, I say, hello, sir. It's so nice to make your acquaintance. May I ask where you're from? Now, why am I saying may I? Why am I saying sir? Those are honorific forms, right? Well, in other languages, that's actually, they have in big differences. In Japanese, it goes even to a different set of tenses, and verbs change according to the age of the person. And in Bahasa, Indonesia, the language of Indonesia, you call someone Anda, which is a form for you. Anda versus you can refer to them in other forms which are very colloquial. Kamu, you can say, or mu. You can connect it to it, and when you use those forms, it affects the way that you relate, and one is honorific and one is not. And if you call someone older than you Anda, it can be a great offense. But if you call someone younger than you Anda, it's crazy. And so when I was first learning language, I figured it'd be best to err to on the side of caution. So I just called everyone Anda, and I would be talking to a little child and using that form, and people would giggle. Why are you talking to him like he's an old man? And so I adjusted it. In Spanish, same thing. We have usted and we have tú. Usted is like the Anda in Indonesia. It means you, but an older person, or someone that you respect that maybe you not yet know. So out of politeness, you say usted, like that. Disculpe. You'd say, usted tiene el tiempo, like, sir, would you tell me what time it is? Whereas tú, oye, then I'm like very friendly. And if I speak to an older gentleman on the street, say, oye, escúchame, like I'm using tuteando, they call it in Spanish, I'm using the tú form, it's an offense. And so we need to learn these differences between age groups and how to deal with them. And in Islamic cultures, that they will come, and any elder the children will bow to. In many cultures, the children will go to the ground and put their forehead on the foot of the elder and then come back up and bow. Speaking of those differences in the way we relate, we see customs like in Japan with the bowing. And you bow to someone that you respect. You bow to most people, but the bowing is extreme. If you, for instance, are an employee in a firm or a company and you relate to your boss and your boss is talking to you, you bow. To the boss, you bow, yes, yes. And then when you're departing from one another, let's say you're on a city street, and I've actually witnessed this with my own eyes many, many times. As you're walking away, you cannot turn your back. You don't turn your back and walk away from your boss like that. You have to bow and back up. Yes, arigato, arigato, and you continue. And I've seen employees, because the boss is still on the street, bowing back, going all the way down a block backwards, bowing. Okay, a little bit, all the way down until they get around the corner, and you see them go around the corner and peek and look, and they can tell when they're out of the boss's sight, and they'll stand up and walk normal and walk away. Very strange, right? Well, that's honorific. And this is where Western culture, especially Americans, Australian, and some of these other countries where we are a bit more gruff, we tend not to have these systems. In fact, there's been a great deal of disrespect that's evolved in the youth these days, and I've noticed in my interactions with younger people, there's no respect at all. But I'll meet young people, and none of them are like, sir, at all to me. They're like, so where you work? Like, in my face, you know, you're a missionary, huh? Well, what do you do? And these are Christians. These are like kids in churches. And so that's disrespectful from my upbringing. So we also then, that brings up another note, that cultures, traditions are evolving all the time. And as we're moving toward the end days, of course, the lack of respect for elders is soaring. And the reason for that is because of the empowerment of individuals through psychology and teaching them that self-worth and value is more important. And we're actually engendering in children this idea that they do not need to respect elders, but only respect themselves. In the last days, men will become lovers of themselves. Now we see between social classes. In different countries, there are often distinctions between the classes that prohibit free communication. There is a way to share with the people, but you have to know how. You understand that there are these different classes, meaning that there are categories of people grouped into realms. In like India, for instance, we have a caste system where ancient, hundreds, thousands of years, is this establishment of layers of society. And when you're born into a layer, you will never escape that layer. If you're a Dalit, or you are the lowest class, the subservient laborers, tantamount to what Jesus emulated and showed himself to be when he took off his clothes and put a towel around his waist to wash the feet of the disciples. He was taking on a role in the lowest class of the people, the ones that raked and covered and cleaned latrines and did this filthy work. Gandhi, for instance. Gandhi was of a higher class, I believe Brahmin, which was the priestly class, but decided there had to be a form of equality. And so he created ashrams where all people did all work and there was no division of classes. This is very disturbing to the Indian culture, but he did it, and there was an issue where his wife was so offended that he expected his wife to rake and cover a latrine, and she blew up. In fact, she received the command secondhand through some other servant or some other person in the ashram that Gandhi asked, go please tell my wife to rake and cover the latrine, it's her turn. And she was so highly offended, and Gandhi had to deal with it. So this is what you see in cultures like India. Now, Gandhi was trying to bring reformation politically for the freedom of the nation so that he could get the people to understand that all are equal and we are not subject to the British Empire. And it worked through civil disobedience. It's a beautiful story. It's amazing. He was a great man in many respects. I wish he had really come to know Christ before his passing. We don't know what happened in his last moments after he was shot and died, but he did say, "Oh God," I hope that he envisioned, he did have a fondness for Christ and for the teachings of Christ. So who knows? We won't know until we get to heaven. A lot of people, absolutely not, because he had the name Hindu on him. He was a Jain. There's no way he's in heaven. Look, names branded on people don't necessarily mean something. It all comes down to what you feel and what you say. And so, who knows? I'm not a judge. Judge nothing before the time. When the judge comes, he's going to sort all that out. I just live by the principles that his word teaches me. But we see this in these different classes. So there's the Dalit class, and Gandhi called them the children of God because he was trying to pick them up. And then there's other warring classes. You have Sikhism, you have the military type soldiers and warriors, you have the priestly class, the Brahmins, which are considered the highest. And so within these different strata of classes, there is a vast cultural divide. I'll give you some examples of this. One particular example you find in this actually happened in a company. I'm sure it happens all the time, but a man was working at his desk on his computer, and this is an administrator of sorts. He is what you might call white collar. He's working in the office on the computer, and he has a work that he has to take care of. And as he gets up from his desk, he does something. He comes, the desk shifts. When the desk shifts, it accidentally unplugs from the electrical socket the computer, and the computer goes out, whereby he can no longer work to meet his deadline. And so what to do? What do you do? How do you fix this situation? Now I ask you, how would you fix that situation if your computer accidentally become unplugged? What's the remedy? What could it possibly be? Now, of course, logically, you're going to say, well, just plug the thing back in. Of course. But he couldn't because it was below his caste. It was below his position. That was a subservient work to do such a thing. Whereby he, at that time, according to the traditions of his people group, he had to summon a technician, a worker, who would come and do that. And so he called. Well, that person was delayed and would not come for quite some time, possibly hours. So his solution to this was to order chai, tea, which is delicious. So he rings the chai bell, ding, 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 and sits there sipping chai, doing nothing until hours later the worker comes in, gets on his hands and knees, climbs under the desk, which is far beneath this man to do anything like that. He plugs it back in, the computer reboots, and then he's able to go on with his work. Why couldn't he do that? Because his class did not allow him to do that. And to you, that sounds ridiculous. And to me, honestly, it does too. Just plug it back in. What's the big deal? But I'm judging that culture from an American perspective. If I go and insulting such a thing about their culture and telling them, look, you know what? Your thousands of years of the evolution of your culture and the way you see things, it's ridiculous. Look, just change. Jesus loves you. Well, how open do you think there will be to that message? I have to learn to understand such things. And this is so deeply embedded in the psychology of the Indian mind in a place like India that you just don't remove it. And it could maybe one day. Certainly in heaven we'll all be equal. But as for now, very hard to get them to think any way differently. And so therefore, what does it really matter if salvation comes as we believe in the heart and it is counted unto righteousness and we confess with the mouth and it results in salvation? That's Romans 10. And so salvation comes through believing that. Salvation has nothing to do with what you feel about your caste level or whether or not you will unplug or plug in to an electrical socket, a computer. And if that's part of your culture, it's the way it is, which, by the way, you have some ridiculous things in your culture too. You just don't realize it because they're absolutely correct to you. But in other lands, you would decide, I'm going to get on my hands and knees, I'm going to plug that thing in, I'll show everybody how great I am. No, you've just dethroned yourself from a place of respect and they see you as a troublemaker and an idiot. There it is. Sometimes even work ethic. I got fired from a job because I dug too fast. In other words, I was given a task with a shovel to dig. As I said, I'm pretty strong, so I could easily dig at a much higher rate, more material removed from a hole than anyone else, and it made the other workers look bad. And I thought, well, this will certainly cause me to be exalted to a whole new realm. Well, the boss came and said that I was a troublemaker and said he no longer wants me to work there. So it's not always what you think. This is fascinating about these different social classes. There was a time that I heard this story of a man who grew up as a Dalit, that is in the lowest class in India, in a village, poor of the poor. But he decided to make something of himself. He applied himself. He was inspired. He educated himself. He learned to read. That afforded him, because of his mind, he was given opportunities, even scholarships, and he ascended through the academic ranks and worked his way up into university and got degrees and got law degrees and masters and PhDs and became a brilliant leader and worked his way into politics and worked his way to the point of being elected as the governor of an entire state. And in a special celebration in his village, political leaders from all over the region came to this special banquet they did for him to honor him in his own hometown. And they set up this big platform and lots of pageantry and tents and lights and banners for their political party, and chief seat of honor for this. The governor is coming, and he set a banquet table was set up on a raised platform. The people also ate as they ate their biryani and their delicious food in this celebration, and he ate his food, and they were all sitting at the special tables where all the villagers sat on the ground out in front. And as he's watching this, he's like thinking about how great it is that someone of his caliber and his poverty could ascend through these ranks to the level of being able to be in this position. What an amazing thing. And as he was there in that position, as they finished eating and the thing wound down and the people started leaving and it was dispersed, he was having conversations here and there. And then he's talking to one of the men on the platform. Now, crouched down behind the table on top of the platform is a man on his hands and his knees who's crawling like with his legs. He's practically sitting on the ground with his butt, but he's like crabbing over with his legs, trying not to be visible, hiding behind the table. And he's reaching up onto the table and he's taking the plates off and cleaning and stacking the plates. And the political leader here, he turns around and he spots this man. And he says, no, you don't have to crouch down like that. We're equals. Look at me. I have ascended this position. And he said, you don't have to clean these plates. And he tries to raise him up and he refuses. He says, no, you misunderstand, sir. He says, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm coming to get my plates. These are my plates. They borrowed them. And the man said, what do you mean? Well, you are unclean as a Dalit, and so they refuse to use their plates to feed you. No matter what this man had done or what he had become, he was still to them unclean because he was by caste a Dalit. The governor, it did not matter. He ascended his way up through the ranks and did what he did, but still they had to get another Dalit that it didn't matter. Their plates could be used, which looked the same. The plates were pretty much the same, but they were owned by a Dalit and would not be contaminated if another Dalit ate, because he was part of that caste, and there's no way I could feed a Dalit from my level. I was once in a pastor's conference, and I was talking to a pastor. We're standing there, and he, in fact, this is the irony of this, he's telling me, and I'm having a conversation literally about caste at that time. Just so happened this leader was Brahmin in his caste. And when you think of it that way, these people that are from a higher caste, as Christians, it's easier for those of the higher caste to say the castes don't matter because they cannot divorce themselves from their caste. And society will always look at them on that level. So he was telling me about there being equality and all are the same, and we treat everyone with respect. And I'm so admiring this Indian pastor that's telling me this that I was impressed that he had that mentality. And he's talking to me and he's talking to people in the church, and then suddenly someone comes in the door. When he spots them coming in the door, he says, what do you want? And he like suddenly changes his tune. He's yelling at this person. Yes, then take this, go, quick, finish your work. And he turns back to me, it's because we are all equals. Well, the person who come in was not supposed to be in that church group, because that church group were people of an upper caste, an upper level. And that particular person who was just there working came, who also was a believer in Christ, but did not belong there. They belonged in a church of a lower caste. Within the realms of Christianity, this exists. And once again, I go back to the question, are you a revolutionary or a missionary? Because God does not circumnavigate cultures. He works through them. And this is a hard lesson for us to learn. And so we see it there in the book. As, how would you plant a church in such an area, I say here. Because there's a way to share with people. In these different countries, there are different distinctions between the classes that prohibit free communication. There is a way to share with the people, but how you do this, how? You have to know. How would you plant a church in such an area? How are you going to plant a church in an area with multi-castes and multi-layers? You think, well, I'm going to go in according to my ideals and principles in my culture. And where I'm from, we do it this way. I'm just going to do one church. And you don't like it, you can lump it, and everybody's going to come to that. And all will be welcome as equals, whether you're from the highest caste or the lowest caste, or you're poor or rich, or man, woman, boy, girl, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in His sight. And you sing the songs and do all those things. And who comes to your church? Likely no one, because they're confused, or only people from the lowest caste come in, and because they even walked in through the door, none of the others will come. And I'm talking about believers. I'm talking about in the realms of Christianity. So what to do? How do you do this? Well, you plant churches in each caste, because they are their own culture, and you reach each group. Now, as a foreigner coming in, there's a tendency to see you as someone of a higher caste. They at least lump you into the upper category with respect, at least. In that culture, their culture of the world, when you come in, they see you as the lowest filth. But in Indian culture, and this is what it was explained to me, they see me as a higher level, as this person that comes in, and that afforded me influence in all realms. I spent a lot of my time on all levels interacting with people, and they were puzzled at me and how to place me. Where do you put me? How do you judge me? Who am I? As a result of their seeking to figure out my social class, because I didn't come from a caste system background, and my family name meant nothing to them. My last name is Nico, N-I-C-A-U-D. It's a French name. They don't know what that is. It doesn't appear in Indian culture, so how do they know where I'm from? And then I noticed the trend that people would always ask me about the things that I owned. If I had anything at all, they would look at my shirt and say, this shirt, how much? They want to know what the cost of the shirt was. And I would explain, well, it cost me this much at this, I got it, oh, I can get cheaper. Because everything they can get cheaper, they say that. But they would ask everything. I'd be talking and they would see my watch and say, that watch, oh, very nice, nice watch. And they would say, how much for that watch? Where my culture, it's rude to ask these questions, right? Like, you don't ask people how much, unless you know them closely. And so I noticed everything I had, they want to know how much. My wedding ring, my watch, my shirt, my shoes, anything. If I had a bicycle, how much? So finally, I was pretty close to one individual, and I asked him privately, because he was coming to my house and helping me learn Hindi. I asked him privately about why. Why is it? And he says, well, I explain it to you this way. He says, you are a puzzle to us. We don't know where to put you. We don't know where to place you. But if we have a general idea of your economic status, how much you are spending, it helps us calibrate your level. And we notice that you do have nice things and you do spend more money and you are eating out a lot. And so I see you funding projects and you do this, you do that. So therefore I know you're of a higher class. Well, that's the only way. See, in his mentality and in the Indian mentality, they felt driven to put me somewhere, so that they know how even to interact with me, because they did not know how to interact on a multi-caste mentality. You understand? It's their psychology. And as I said in the beginning of this, if you push that away and say, well, this doesn't really matter, this isn't important, you're rejecting them as a person. If you say to them, none of this matters, your culture is irrelevant, then you offend them as a person. I do, however, want to give you a little look into the future of a soul. Let's say that you get someone to come to Christ. They receive Jesus as their Savior. They love Jesus with all their heart, all their soul, and all their mind, all their strength. They go into deeper realms of spirit. They start finding out that there is much more to this life than what we see, and that everything on earth is wood, hay, and stubble, and that every culture and everything on the planet is irrelevant ultimately to eternity and what God is. You start to change your value system. You start to think in terms of eternity. You have your treasure above, not below. And where your treasure is, your heart is, and so goes your mind with your heart. So you start understanding life differently, and you realize there's one standard above even culture, and that is Jesus. And if you can do that, and even break the power of cultures over you, then you will be a free individual, no longer bound by the prince of the power of the air and all the rules and laws and traditions. But until that time comes, and even if it does come and you become free, you cannot use that freedom as a lifestyle in interaction with other people, because you will become a stumbling block, the Bible says. Your liberties, your freedoms, yes, it was for freedom that Christ set you free. You're no longer under any kind of bondage, religious or cultural, at all. You're free to do whatever you want to do. But what is your freedom used for? If my freedom becomes an offense to someone, then how can I relate to them? So therefore, it behooves me to be like the doulos pattern we learned of a servant, that although I've been given my freedom, I have to take that freedom back sometimes. In missionary service, I have to lay down my freedom. I have to be the grain of wheat that falls to the ground and dies. I need to be able to, when relating to different social classes, when relating to different ages, not just do what is comfortable to me, but reinvent myself, become different. I actually have worked hard at this. It's what I do for a career, you understand. If I'm giving you this advice, I'm not giving it to you from conjecture. I'm giving it to you from experience, and that's why it carries a certain ethos to it. It is what I have lived. It's what I know to be true, and I have reinvented myself. But no matter how hard I have tried, and no matter how hard I have worked at evolving into different forms that fit different cultures, I am hopelessly and helplessly at heart an American boy. And no matter what I do, and believe me, I'm desperately trying to be a chameleon culturally, but still my Americanness, after all these years of full-time dedication to this reformation of self, my Americanness keeps coming back, because it is also my identity. And also, God allows my identity. I think of it sometimes as the messenger of Satan, or as the thorn of the flesh that I have sought to be freed from many times. And God saying, no, in your weakness I'll be strong. In other words, my cultural restrictions and limitations I have found to be a strength that God can use. And it's the same for you. You are who you are. I'm not asking you to forsake your identity. I'm not asking you to forsake your heritage. In fact, very often people ask me questions. I'm not superimposing upon them or pushing on them my culture or who I am, my ideas or who I am, but they want to know. And there are elements of my culture that are very good. One time I was in southern Mexico, and the Lord gave me a vision on how to build this tabernacle. And I did. I constructed all the pieces together, put them in place, and erected this big tent system that I would lift up every Sunday. I did it all on my own, just in what God showed me. And one day I was out there pulling it up and tightening the ropes and putting everything in place. And one of the sisters in the church, Gela, which was the mother-in-law of Marcela, the first person saved in the ministry there in Acapulco, she was watching me put up that tent. And her words were, you people, you white people from America, you're just smarter. You do things. You just do. None of us would have just done this. And you just do this. Now, of course, I, at that moment, in an attempt to be humble, said, no, 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 it's just anybody can do this. But you know what I found out? Not anybody can. And it is connected to my Americanness. My culture says this: if you can do it, I can do it better. In Mexican culture, they say, if you can do it, why should I? That's the contrast. So yeah, my culture drives me to get things done. Maybe someone may look at it and say that's avarice, that is arrogant behavior. You just think you're so special, this, that, the other. But usually the people making those criticisms are the inactive people that do not go try to make things happen and get things done. So we look at it from different sides. You are who you are, but we're also required to change. And we have to understand that God works through these cultures. And that's what we're going to pick up on, that theme right after we come back from our break.